introduction is to provide the context for the detailed facts that you will hear, and our starting point is the definition of what constitutes abuse. And our journey starts with the United Nations. We have a technical issue. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just... Okay, we now understand that this tea break time, for which you're obviously very, very grateful, I'd like to thank Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Where we stopped before the break was at the point where we need to define what sexual exploitation and sexual abuse actually means. And this definition is very key in terms of the evidence that you will be hearing. And when I cover this and read it out for you, you will understand why. Oops. As we said, we have technical gremlins. Oh, no, we don't. We're fine. Okay. Sexual exploitation, as defined by the UN, means any actual or attempted abuse of a position of vulnerability, differential power, or trust for sexual purposes, including, and this is key, but not limited to, profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from the sexual exploitation of another. The term sexual abuse means the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature, whether by force or unequal or coercive conditions. And I want you to bear in mind those words: vulnerability, differential power, trust, profiting monetarily, socially, and politically. The UN banner that you see on the screen mentions the words UN and related personnel. The related personnel includes the Children's Commissioners, whose role is to promote implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And you might be asking, who are these people? And I would just like to explain the context. The role of the Office of the Children's Commissioner for Wales was created in 2001 in response to recommendations by Sir Ronald Waterhouse. In his report of his inquiry into abuse in children's homes in North Wales, which he poignantly named Lost in Care, which was published in 2000, he created this role. As a result of the Children's Act in 2004, the post of Office of Children's Commissioner for England was created, and now there are 4 of these, one each for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The Children and Families Act of 2014 changed their primary function from representing the views and interests of children and young people to promoting and protecting children's rights as defined and determined by the UN. Now, Maggie Atkinson, who is soon to be replaced, is OCC England. Her credentials are that she obtained a teaching qualification in English, history, and drama, is a member of Common Purpose, and although appointed Children's Commissioner for England in 2010, she was initially rejected by the Education Select Committee, but Ed Balls overruled that decision. Keith Towler, seen as Superman on the right, and this is from his own website for children, has a degree in fine art from Exeter College of Art and Design and is chair of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child for Wales. And the reason that I think they are pertinent. Tim Loudon, MP, in his open letter to David Cameron on the 8th of November 2012, called for an overarching inquiry into child abuse, saying there was clearly a role for the Children's Commissioners. He also wrote, organised sexual exploitation has been manifesting itself in recent years, evidenced in Rochdale, Derby, and elsewhere. And there are many more deeply shocking cases still to come. And he wrote that in 2012. He also said, the public will now wonder what has actually changed since Savile or North Wales. Curiously, the Children's Commissioners have been noticeable by the absence of their voices in the public coverage of child abuse, and this is very surprising. Because in 2011, in fact in October 2011, they organised their own inquiry into child sexual abuse. This was at the behest of Michael Gove, who was prompted by the convictions in Rochdale. He asked for an accelerated report, and in consequence, and I quote from the report that was produced, the evidence was partial. The terms of reference, and we will talk more about these later, of this particular CSA inquiry was to promote children's rights with a special focus on children in care. Now, since the OCC report to the Department of Education, and that's the Right Honourable Michael Gove, their findings were submitted to him, and an extract from the report includes the following information. Glasses on. The NSPCC's study of child maltreatment demonstrated that 34% of children who were sexually abused by an adult did not tell anyone about it. In other words, the graph, the numbers that you saw from the NSPCC graph on the first part of the presentation could at least be understated by 34%. What disturbs me, and I hope disturbs you, is that the reliance on NSPCC data, the NSPCC, a charity, 90% funded by the public, and also in the House of Lords, the observation that the Office of Children's Commissioner has been constrained by an unnecessarily close working relationship with the Department for Education. I want to share some more data from that report. Michael Gove's big society is apparently so vast that many children are lost in care, as indicated in the bar chart shown. Before I explain the data, a few clarifying statements. The majority of data gathered in respect of the missing children emanates from local authority residential care homes, not independent care homes. Missing incidents are inconsistently reported across locations, and on average, 45% of children in care live in care homes outside of the local authority, which has primary responsibility. And I want to share this data with you, and I hope you're as shocked as I was. The bar chart shown represents 306 children, all from location A. 61 are missing, 6 are not, 10 are status unknown, and 229 are labelled no data. That's 74% of the children in location A. Huh. This may help shed a little light on that data. This data is not directly related to the OCC inquiry, but in the aftermath of a search for 114 missing files in connection with the Dickens dossiers, of which there were actually 5, and they included a 1 million signature petition, the government released a 37-page file which reveals the exact number of files on child abuse evidence that was either lost or destroyed during the period 79 to 99. 2,074 files were destroyed. 81% of case files on abused children were destroyed. All of this points to massive government failings, which are echoed in the headlines. In particular, we have to mention Rotherham and Bernardo's, a charity, in their independent review of the Rotherham Safeguarding Children Board, commended them for their transparency, their openness, and their honesty in December 2013. And then in 2015, they tweeted, "We need to know how people in key places got away with abusing children for so long. It's staggering." And indeed, the hypocrisy is staggering. The blurring of boundaries between people, professions, public and private sectors, covered in the article, "The Rotherham Common Purpose Effect," is a microcosm of a national problem. The National Crime Agency is now investigating Rotherham for the councillors of Rotherham, for systematically withholding the truth, with a view to charging them with misconduct. And that's the way we have chosen to present our evidence. I know John has covered it, but as a reminder, misconduct is committed when a public officer, acting as such, willfully neglects to perform his duty and or willfully misconducts himself to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office holder without reasonable excuse or justification. And misconduct is the charge that we have chosen to evidence to you in the sessions today and tomorrow afternoon. And I would add, there is no such thing as accidental failure. All failure is at least half imposed. And where does the responsibility lie? Just a small schematic to indicate those who we will be investigating and where we are pointing the finger. Now, originally, our plan was that you would have a break to consider that overview before you delved into a full evidence session. Unfortunately for you, I'm afraid you have to put up with me just a tad longer. I will advance the slides, and we'll see. Theresa May, a name or a statement of ambiguous intent. When interviewed on the Andrew Marr show, Theresa May claimed to be ignorant of how state institutions failed to protect children. But we have an answer to that question. Our investigations show a very clear pattern of repeat behaviour designed to ensure a cover-up of child abuse and child exploitation. We will show you both how it was possible and who stands accountable. The mainstream media continually emphasise that the abuse is historic, and we are indebted to their guidance, since going back in time provides the platform for us to illustrate that history repeats itself. And to evidence this, we are now going to step back to the mid-1990s and the Waterhouse tribunal, which was set up to investigate child abuse in North Wales. How was it possible? Modus operandi 1, deferred investigations. Prior to the Waterhouse tribunal, there were a number of investigations into widespread child abuse within the institutions in Wales. The Gillings report, which I will explain shortly, was the 14th report into Clwyd children's homes. 12 internal council reports were prepared at various times on individual homes, as well as investigating other abuse allegations. At the centre of the North Wales inquiries was Bryn Estyn in Wrexham, which was one of the 2 main local authority homes. It comprised an assessment facility, a remand home, and long-term residential care for between 40 and 60 boys. As a remand home, it fell under the auspices of the Home Office until 1973. Prior to the Cartref inquiry, abuse allegations in Clwyd led to the convictions of Stephen Norris in 1990 for abuse at the community home, and also another high-profile case in 1991 involving Frederick Rutter, a former police officer. The Cartref panel of inquiry, which delivered its report a year later in 1992, established that a paedophile link between suspects and convicted offenders was that at some stage in their careers, they had all worked at Bryn Estyn. This connection also dovetailed with other allegations against a suspected abuser, who was also an employee, an ex-employee of Bryn Estyn. This information was passed to the police in July 91, and an investigation was initiated in August of the same year. Further allegations were forthcoming, including retired and serving police officers. In March of 93, files on these officers were submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, who advised against taking it further. The Gillings 2-year inquiry had uncovered an appalling and extensive history of child abuse, including buggery, assault, and cruelty, dating back at least 2 decades, and culminating with a series of paedophile trials covering Bryn Estyn. All of these official inquiries and investigations proved conclusively that wide-scale abuse was occurring and had been occurring over decades. Yet it took well over 6 years of reports and whistleblower campaigning for the government to announce a full-scale inquiry, which William Hague did in his capacity as Secretary of State for Wales in 1996. How could this happen? How could it take so long? Well, part of the reason rests in what we have called the missing dossiers strategy. Because not one of those 14 reports, including Gillings or Cartref, was ever made public. So we go on to the next template. Information withheld or lost. The Cartref inquiry was chaired by John F. Banham, a retired senior officer of Cheshire Social Services. Interestingly, the Clwyd Area Child Protection Committee elected to set up parallel inquiries with the Education Department and the Health Authority. The 3 inquiries were all completed in June of 91. After a panel review of these inquiries, Clwyd County Solicitor discussed with their insurers, Municipal Mutual Insurance, and the Crown Prosecution Service, the extent to which the report could be published. The outcome, a year and a half later, in October of 92, was that there would be no debate on matters that might be subject of criminal proceedings, and significantly, that might generate claims against Clwyd. In other words, the reports were squashed. In the 1996 inquiry by John Gillings, that was shelved due to fears that there would be compensation claims, and so copies were ordered to be pulped. I guess that was the predecessor to shredding. Pirate copies of the report, seen by only a few people, were protected for years. Child abuse whistleblower and ex-Duncroft girl, Andrea Davison, had a copy, which was seized by the Derby and North Wales Police in January 2010. Former Minister MP Rod Richards said he had seen it, and the report named Peter Morrison as a child abuser. Sir Peter Hugh Morrison, PC, was a British Conservative politician MP for Chester from 1974 to 1992, and parliamentary private secretary to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. PC, in this case, stands for Privy Council. When Clywyd decided not to publish the Jennings report, it passed it on, complete with a recommendation for a judicial review, to William Hague, the Secretary of State for Wales. The 300-page Jennings report was eventually published following an FOI request by the BBC. There's irony. A heavily redacted version of Jennings was released on the 8th of July 2013 by Wrexham County Borough Council, 17 years after it was first produced. There's 2 points to note here. The pirate copies appear to be typed in a different font to that of the recently released redacted versions. And the redacted version was perhaps not as informative as the original. One of the key elements of this manipulation of any investigation rests with what should be coming up on the next slide, the terms of reference. Let me zoom that for you. Oh, good. The Waterhouse Tribunal terms of reference were proposed by officials in the Welsh office and agreed by ministers and widely supported by Parliament. The impact, I'm giving you just a moment to focus on the screen, the impact of this was that many allegations were not fully investigated. Since the responsibility for approved schools and remand homes was not transferred from the Home Office to the Secretary of State for Wales until 1973, setting the Waterhouse terms of reference from 1974, of course, meant that the Home Office would never suffer scrutiny. The remit prevented investigation into abuse outside 2 specific areas. This, in turn, curtailed investigation into staff who had links with other care homes, and this was already known. Networks of related abusers remained uninvestigated, and this omission will be examined in more detail later in the evidence sessions. Earlier reports had shown that abuse was widespread and was not confined to care home premises. Children were trafficked outside of those homes. And most controversially, excluding scrutiny of decisions whether to prosecute named individuals means that Peter Morrison, amongst others, who had already been named, got off scot-free. How else do they manage this? How else is it possible? The control of key personnel. William Hague chose Sir Ronald Waterhouse as chair of the tribunal. This fact is confirmed by Ronald Waterhouse himself, who, in response to an opening question from Nick Booth, the barrister, for one of the groups of former residents in care homes who made an application about masonry, said, "The members of the tribunal are in this position. The tribunal was set up by Parliament, and the members of it were appointed by the Secretary of State for Wales. and the criticism of the composition should be addressed through the proper channels. I think he was directing us to whom we should address our concerns. Waterhouse kept handwritten notes throughout, and at the end of each day produced a meticulously detailed resume of the evidence, which he eventually incorporated into his report, Lost in Care, which took him a year to write and ran, allegedly, to more than 1,000 pages. The online public version of Lost in Care numbers 893 pages. Did Waterhouse do a good job? Well, you'll probably have to hear a little more of the evidence to understand whether that was the case, and you'll have to bear with me because technically this could go wrong. Right. Let's try.
Des Frost is a haunted man. 30 years ago, he says he went to the police to warn them of allegations of child abuse in North Wales. Then he was deputy director of the Bryn Allen Children's Home near Wrexham. In 1995, its owner, John Allen, was jailed for 6 years for sexually abusing the children in his care. But we can reveal that more than 10 years earlier, Des Frost says he was concerned about his boss.
I was approached by a member of staff who told me briefly of some rumours that were going around the organisation. And he told me some pretty hairy stories about allegations of child abuse by John. I then decided to go to the police on behalf of myself and the rest of the staff because it was a difficult situation, but I didn't want it ever said, why didn't you do anything about it?
He went to the police in Chester where he lived and asked them to contact police in Wrexham. Des Frost's interview was recorded in 1997, but ITV Wales was prevented from broadcasting it because of a threat of legal action by the North Wales Child Abuse Tribunal.
A couple of days before transmission, officials of the tribunal found out that Des Frost had been interviewed. They put pressure on the programme to remove any new allegations that Des Frost was making. The threat was contempt proceeding, which could have meant that some journalists went to prison. In the end, the allegations were removed, especially because we were certain that Des Frost was bound to be called as a witness before the tribunal.
Des Frost, too, thought he would be called as a witness to give his evidence before it. He says he told tribunal staff he was willing to appear, but he was never called.
I honestly thought I would be called, and I wasn't. And that really was something that I didn't understand.
This is Lost in Care, the Waterhouse report that's now itself being investigated by a judge. One of its key conclusions was that North Wales Police could not be criticised for the way it handled allegations of abuse. Des Frost's evidence suggests that conclusion can now be questioned, and that there may have been missed opportunities by the police to stop the abuse a decade earlier.
I think that might give an indication of how whistleblowers and survivors are treated. There is more than one reference, surprisingly, to paedophile rings in the Waterhouse report. I quote, "Again, it must be said that we have not received any criticisms of these individual investigations, save for a submission that the further investigation of Gary Cook and possibly the investigations of Warwick James and Gillison and Jerry should have been wider because of the alleged existence of a paedophile ring. And during the period under review, there was a paedophile ring in the Wrexham and Chester areas in the sense that there were a number of male persons, many of them known to one another, who were engaged in paedophile activities and were targeting young males in their middle teens. The evidence does not establish that they were solely or mainly interested in persons in care, but such youngsters were particularly vulnerable to their approaches. I would remind you that Sir Peter Morrison was MP for Chester and was named in the Jillings report. Waterhouse also made particular reference to the Chester branch of the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, some members of which, he wrote, saw it as a useful agency for identifying and contacting potential victims. Following the publication of the Lost in Care report, on the 16th of February 2000, BBC Wales rapidly announced that further prosecutions were unlikely. Deputy Chief Constable of North Wales Police, John Owen, welcomed the Waterhouse inquiry's findings and said its evidence would not form the basis of further political investigations. The evidence had already been considered by the Crown Prosecution Service, and the publication of this report does not of itself prove or provide additional evidence to merit further prosecutions, he said. To help you determine whether the handling of the Waterhouse Tribunal was fit for purpose, and for whom, we're going to fast forward now to 2012. We're going to skillfully evade any mention of Elm Guest House and the cover-ups of that scandal in 1982, and then again in 1990, and then again present day. What is happening here? Apart from the fact it's the wrong slide. So we'll just move on. When we ask whether Waterhouse was fit for purpose, you must understand that the Waterhouse Tribunal report is now the subject of two separate investigations, which were launched in November 2012, pretty much the same date as Tim Latton wrote to David Cameron, suggesting that there be an overarching inquiry. So we have first the independent Mercure review, which was established on the 8th of November 2012, to examine the conduct and remit of Sir Ronald Waterhouse's inquiry. It is chaired by Dame Julia Wendy Mercure, to whom we offer belated congratulations for her timely elevation in November 2012 to the Privy Council. Mercure issued a paper published on January 8th, 2013, inviting submissions from people with an interest in the issues it outlined. Two submissions were from Andrea Davison and Brunel and Victims. An extract from Andrea Davison's submission is on the screen. Let me read it. I am aware that the following parliamentarians knew about the elite paedophile ring and the cover-up, and she names Willie Whitelaw, John Major, Ken Livingston, Edwina Curry, David Waddington, Michael Howard, Margaret Thatcher, Leon Britton, Ken Clark, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Geoffrey Dickens, who was the whistleblower, Alan Michael, Rod Richards, John Merrick, and William Hay. Later, you're going to be hearing first-hand experience of the North Wales State Care experience. Now, nearly 2.5 years later, the review, which Justice Mercure promised would be quick and meticulous, has gone strangely silent. The official website hasn't been updated since June of 2013. No reasons are given. No time is given for submission to government, nor any idea of the publication date. FOI requests for updates remain unanswered. That's information withheld. And why would they withhold that information? The answer is what you see on screen. It's a lame duck. It's a dead-end investigation. It's a devil and deep blue sea situation. If McCure concludes that the Waterhouse terms of reference were too narrow, then William Hague stands accountable. If McCure concludes the terms of reference were appropriate, the lack of convictions and follow-up simply validates that this was a massive cover-up. And MPs from all parties are implicated. So just recall the UN definition of sexual exploitation. Actual or attempted abuse, positions of vulnerability, not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically. This is dirty politics. Now, what of this second investigation of Waterhouse? We have Operation Pallial. Now, that was begun a week later, November 15th, 2012. This is led by Keith Bristow. He's Director General of the National Crime Agency, and his brief is to re-examine the allegations of historic abuse in North Wales and the original police investigations. Now, Bristow is not a PC, as in Privy Council. He's rather a CP, as in common purpose. Well, the terms of reference are interesting. I'm not sure that I have those on the slide, so I'll read. We are going to assess any information. We are going to review the historic police investigations. And we are going to deliver the terms of reference. And if the need is identified, we might investigate those allegations where necessary. We shouldn't denigrate, actually. Operation Pallial has achieved some results, unlike many other investigations. Firstly, we have an admission that many abusers have evaded justice. The reason? The survivors were ignored and fobbed off, and the abusers died of old age before an investigation was undertaken. Secondly, we have a complete exoneration of the North Wales Police. This was obviously a very efficient investigation, as it was completed within 5 months, since this extract comes from the Pallial report, the interim report of April 2013. Now, the dates that they mention here are rather interesting, because they say they have identified 120 potential suspects. Predatory sex attacks against vulnerable youngsters between 1953 and 1995, i.e., quite a long time before the terms of reference that Sir William Hague set for the Waterhouse Tribunal. But we have a crowning achievement. This merits some attention. Pallial have convicted a known serial abuser. John Allen. Waterhouse has this to say in his report in respect of John Allen. When John Allen was tried early in '95, he was not charged with any offence of buggery, but we have heard evidence from 3 witnesses who alleged that they were buggered by him, and another who said that he attempted to do so on 4 occasions. The fairest judgment that we can make upon this matter is that there is no credible evidence that Allen's offences went beyond indecent assaults, on some occasions, but that we cannot make a more decisive finding, bearing in mind the procedural limitations of an inquiry like this. John Allen, 73, of Needham Market, Suffolk, who had denied 40 counts of sex abuse against 19 boys and 1 girl in the late 1960s up to the early 1990s, was convicted at Mould Crown Court after being convicted of 33 charges. Now, whilst the police were, and are, seemingly unable to unearth the paedophile network, our evidence gatherers have been rather more successful. Now, this information will be forthcoming in the next sessions. And where are we today? Well, we have a child abuse inquiry and police investigations. And I'm going to run through this quite quickly because I know that we're relatively tight on time. What I'd like you to do, as potential members of our grand jury, is to match the statements and the information to the categories that I hope you can see on screen. So, where do we start? On the 7th of July 2014, Theresa May announced the independent panel inquiry into child sexual abuse, which was set up to consider, note the terms of reference, whether public bodies and other non-state institutions have taken seriously their duty of care. And we have seen evidence that that cannot possibly be the case. Let us review progress. Late 2012, following Tom Watson's claim in the House of Commons that there had been a cover-up of Westminster paedophiles, a scoping exercise known as Operation Fairbank was launched to establish if there was sufficient evidence for a formal inquiry. A number of police operations have spawned from this. However, prosecutions are very few, other than a handful of television celebrities. Elsewhere, abuse allegations against the late MP Cyril Smith are aired in Parliament by Rochdale MP Simon Dancer. Greater Manchester Police say he should have been prosecuted. January 2013, police launched Operation Fernbridge to investigate allegations about a paedophile network linked to Parliament number 10, centred on the Elm Guest House in Barnes, south-west London. February 2013, we have the Dickens dossier drama. Mark Sedwill, the most senior Home Office civil servant, launches an independent review of more than 746,000 files from 1979 to 99 that were passed to the Home Office to identify any information received about organised child abuse and the outcome of any action taken. He draws a blank, though he does disclose that 114 files are missing. 4th of July 2014, Prime Minister David Cameron orders Mr. Sedwill to look again at the handling of the 2013 Home Office review. These investigations are now known colloquially as the Wanless, Witless, I beg your pardon, Whittam. And then we have, on the 8th of July 2014, Butler Sloss is announced as the chair of the inquiry. And a week later, on the 14th of July, Baroness Butler Sloss stands down as the head of the independent inquiry. She faced calls to quit because her late brother, Sir Michael Hivers, was Attorney General in the 1980s, and he attempted to cover up Sir Peter Hayman's paedophilia, and he's also been implicated as an abuser himself. In October 2014, Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf, was named the new head of the inquiry. No, beg your pardon. She resigned, having been named the head of the inquiry on the 5th of September. She lasted just a little longer. Some victims and representatives called for her resignation after she disclosed she had 5 dinners with Lord Britton from 2008 to 2012. Now, those are not the only reasons. I've summarised. She's also one of his neighbours, or was. Baron Spinnythorpe, that's Leon Britton, stands accused of abuse at Elm Guest House, and as Home Secretary in Thatcher's government of not dealing appropriately with the Dickens dossiers on paedophiles. Then we have November 2014. We have a review by the NSPCC, Chief Executive Peter Wanless, and I know there'll be some people in this room that will sit up at the name. He said it was impossible to say whether files were removed to cover up abuse, but found nothing to support such concerns. He also found no evidence that the paedophile information exchange, known as PI, was funded by the Home Office. 21st of January 2015, Lord Britain dies. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
After a long battle with cancer. He joins a long list of alleged abusers who were either not questioned or demised just before their trials. How unfortunate. On the same day, a university lecturer unearths a previously top-secret file held at the National Archives, which purportedly contains allegations of unnatural sexual behaviour by establishment figures in the 1980s. Talk about time. On the 4th of February 2014, New Zealand Judge Lowell Goddard is named by the Home Secretary as the new head of the inquiry. Although May pledged to consult with survivors, Goddard was nominated by Ben Emerson QC, who controversially assisted Fiona Woolf in downplaying her links with Leon Britton, and who also stands accused of bullying and gagging the inquiry panel members. Of course, they've all been fired, but he hasn't. So, where are we now? I managed to pull this off the website, but it's a couple of days old, so I doubt much will have changed since then. An update on the inquiry official government website, posted on the 23rd of February. The inquiry is in transition as we prepare for a new chair and panel to take up their roles. Changes will be made to this website over the next few weeks, but anyone wishing to contact the inquiry can still do so through the contacts page. A new website is also being constructed. Why? To get rid of incriminating information that they posted up there in the first place, where they withheld information and lied about the connections. So that's the template. That's what I want you to think about. Now I'm going to ask for guidance here, because I have another presentation that follows on from this. And I'm wondering, they must be tired of listening to me. Are you sure? Are you happy for me to continue? Can you bear it?
Yeah.
This is a lot of information. It's a lot